Whose land did Israel take at the end of Numbers 21? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Numbers on Walking Through the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Numbers chapter 21. We're going to be reading from verses 21 to 35. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Numbers 21, beginning of verse 21. Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, saying, "Let me pass through your land. We will not turn aside into the fields or vineyards. We will not drink water from wells. We will go by the king's highway until we have passed through your territory." But Sihon would not allow Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together and went out against Israel in the wilderness. And he came to Jahaz and fought against Israel. Then Israel defeated him with the edge of the sword and took possession of his land from the Arnon to the Jabbok, as far as the people of Ammon. For the border of the people of Ammon was fortified. So Israel took all these cities, and Israel dwelt in all the cities of the Amorites, in Heshban and in all its villages. For Heshban was the city of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab, and had taken all his land from his hand as far as the Arnon. Therefore those who speak in Proverbs say, "Come to Heshbon, let it be built. Let the city of Sihon be repaired. For fire went out from Heshbon, a flame from the city of Sihon. It consumed Ar of Moab, the lords of the heights of the Arnon. Woe to you, Moab! You have perished. O people of Shemosh! He has given his sons as fugitives, and his daughters into captivity, to Sihon, king of the Amorites. But we have shot at them. Heshbon has perished as far as Dibon. Then we laid waste as far as Nophah, which reaches Medeba." Thus Israel went into the land of the Amorites. Then Moses sent to spy out Gezer, and they took its villages and drove out the Amorites who were there. And they turned and went up by the way to Bashan. So Og, king of Bashan, went out against them, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Do not fear him, for I have delivered him into your hand with all his people and his land. And you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon." So they defeated him, his sons, and all his people, until there was no survivor left him, and they took possession of his land. The children of Israel are traveling towards Canaan, which they will eventually invade from the east, across from the city of Jericho. They had to pass around Edom and Moab because those nations wouldn't allow them safe passage to pass through. They crossed the Arnon River, and our last episode ended with them camping in the plains of Moab, which is near Jericho. When we come to verse 21, to the casual reader, we have a problem. If Israel is in the plains of Moab in verse 20, then they've already passed through the land of the Amorites, yet here in verse 21, they're asking Sihon, king of the Amorites, for permission to pass through. To some, this appears to be a contradiction. To others, an insertion by a scribe sometime later. But to listeners to this podcast, you know that there is another explanation. Numbers isn't giving us a chronology here. We're used to having stories presented as this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and so on. But the Bible doesn't always present stories that way. If you think following the narrative in Numbers at times can be difficult, just wait until the Lord willing we study the book of Judges, and you'll think that Numbers was easy. What appears to be going on here is that the writer of Numbers, Moses, is stepping back in time between verses 20 and 21 in order to give us a little information for how Israel would get to be across from Jericho. Recall that the borders between Moab and the Amorites is the Arnon River. However, we said that the borders of Moab appeared to have gone further north before this time because today's reading says that Sihon had fought the former king of Moab and taken his land as far as the Arnon. That is probably why the plains across from Jericho were called the plains of Moab, and not the plains of the Amorites. Now when Israel crossed the Arnon, just as they did before with other nations, they asked for permission to pass through. For at this time at least, it doesn't appear that God was giving Israel this land east of the Jordan, or if he was, it doesn't appear that that moment was the time he would give it. However, unlike Moab and Edom, that simply refused to allow Israel safe passage, Sihon not only didn't allow safe passage, but he came and attacked Israel. Israel, because God was on their side, easily defeated Sihon and his forces and took possession of this land, which was from the Arnon to the Jabbok River, which is further north than Jericho, situated on the east side of the Jordan, about level with where Shechem is. We often think of the conquest of Canaan beginning at Jericho in the book of Joshua, but the battles to take Canaan actually started here. Why do we say this? Because later on in Numbers, Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh are going to be allotted this land on the east of the Jordan, while the other tribes are going to get land on the west of the Jordan, with the exception of Manasseh, who will get land on both sides of the Jordan. Israel praised God for their victories, which begin to instill fear in the other peoples of the land. How do we know? Well, in verse 33, Og, king of Bashan being situated on the east side of the Jordan near the Sea of Galilee, decided to go out against Israel. This battle was in response to Moses sending spies up in that direction at God's command, but after Israel defeated Sihon, the other nations sat up and took notice. Now, just like with Sihon, the Lord was with Israel, and they defeated the people of Bashan and took possession of their land. So Israel controlled land on the east side of the Jordan, from the northern border of Moab at the Arnon River all the way north to the Sea of Galilee. Israel's eastern control only went to the borders with the Ammonites because it was heavily fortified and because God wasn't going to give Israel the Ammonite land because this people was a descendant of Lot, like the Moabites were. However, this battle here will come up in our study of Jephthah in the book of Judges. So make a note in your Bibles if you do that, so that when we get there, you can refresh your memories as to what happened here. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Numbers chapter 22, verses 1 to 12, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.